So again, good morning, everybody. I started recording just to let everybody know. So thanks everybody for coming on today instead of yesterday. I know, so I had gotten an email from one person saying that they were trying to also go to the meeting from the Student Safety Center for stuff for their, that they also do. And so I talked with Chelsea, and so we moved this meeting to today, and we'll keep it on Wednesday at 10 o'clock moving forward, just so that those people who need to attend both meetings can attend both meetings. And so hopefully it doesn't conflict with too many other meetings that you may have, as I think everybody is on Zoom a lot or some similar program. So this morning, Chelsea had sent me a schedule, and I don't know if she's going to do it or somebody else that's part of the review committee from the that's reviewing the ESSER applications. But so from 10 to 10:20 or approximately thereof, they're going to review some ESSER projects, and then for about 10 minutes have discussion. And then after that, if there's any financial questions around ESSER, then we'll take those questions. So Chelsea, are you gonna do the review of ESSER questions, or is somebody else doing that? Or I have a chat.
Says sure,
okay.
All
right. So I'm going to turn it over to Chelsea.
Perfect. Thanks. I just need to be the host, and then I'll share our presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
I will make you a host. So actually, I can make you I think you can share as the co-host, right? Are you able to share now, Chelsea?
I believe so. I'm just pulling it up right now. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, so good morning. I know that there are many new folks that are a part of this conversation that were not with us 8 weeks ago. So as a result of the new folks being here and a lot of the questions we've been receiving over the past couple of days, we want to just take this from the very beginning to give you a refresher of some of the important points that you'll need to know to submit a successful application. Additionally, I have all of the ESSER team on the call with me today. The important part for them to be here is that each of the federal programs that are eligible under CARES ESSER funding, we work together as a team to review applications. And so those folks are part of that brain trust that is reading and either approving or asking for additional or clarifying information. And so they're here to also provide additional information that you might need based on the questions we have at the end of the presentation. The other important note that I wanted to make is that anything we share this morning is not our attempt at saying this is the only way that it can be done or that a district can be successful at applying for funds. That most certainly is not the case. rather, this is an opportunity for folks that haven't submitted an application to get an idea of some of the things that are happening in other SAUs. I know a few folks have said, it would be helpful just to have me kind of spark some ideas to share about what other people are doing. So after the presentation, we're going to open it up and allow folks to share some of their great ideas and answer any questions you might have. So today's presentation is simply a discussion on those that have been successful. So to date, we have had just under 20 submissions, and 10 of which have been approved. And if they haven't already this morning, they will by the end of the day receive their grant award notification. So those 10 districts had very clear applications, and it was clear to the review team what the intentions are with the funding. You'll notice that many of them didn't have the kind of detail that you typically have in other federal program applications. We're not reopening because of a lack of detail in most cases. We're reopening because of allowability. So if what was in the application is not allowable, we are required to reopen it. We're also sending notes to folks if the application includes something that may impact state aid in the future. So just as a reminder, the CARES Act funding became available now almost 2 months ago, and quite frankly, Maine has been one of the first states to do this process. And so it's been great to talk to other folks in other states who are just a little bit further behind us, and them kind of sharing what they're hoping to do, and us being able to share what we've learned along the way. There are several different funding streams in the CARES Act for the Education Stabilization Fund. Now, last week, I think there were some new folks on the call, and there was some information that was shared that caused some confusion. And so I just want to take an opportunity here to go back over that information in a way that is brief, but make sure that you walk away from this slide training with the information you need to be successful in your roles. So there are 3 types of funding in the CARES Act. And so if folks ask you, well, isn't that allowable in the CARES Act? You need to ask them, well, which funding stream are you thinking of, right? So the first one is the governor's funding. Every governor in the country was able to apply for funding and then allocate that funding out based on their state's priorities. In Maine, the Mills administration took our $9.2 million that was awarded to the state and gave it to the Department of Education to address connectivity statewide for all Maine students. And the focus was to make sure that every child has a connection to a caring adult, but also they can receive instruction while they're home. And so what happened beginning in March was that the department sent out a series of surveys. And so we have sent out to date 4 surveys to educators across the state, superintendents and principals and tech directors, academy leaders, charter schools, to say, we need to know what your needs are so that we can meet them. And each school district was able to, do their internal needs assessment and share their needs with us. And all of the needs that have been shared to date have been met. So that's the GEAR funding. The GEAR funding, as I said, went through a survey. Nothing was required of anyone, but if you wanted to participate, if you wanted to be able to meet the needs that way, you would complete a survey. We suspect that we will be able to send out a 5th survey very soon. So we have a list of folks that would like to be included, and they will receive that link. If you would like to be included, you'll need to simply email Paige Nichols. We'll put her email in the chat. But the GEARS funding is being used to procure connectivity, so hotspots and devices for students that do not have them. You cannot ask the department to purchase a specific device, nor is the department able to reimburse costs that have already been obligated. Which brings us to the funding that we're talking a lot about every week now, is the ESSERF funding. So the elementary and secondary education funding, that funding is for K-12, pre-K to 12 in our state, and that is the application that you're completing to release your ESSERF funds. Now, for Maine, that $43.7 million, it's a little shy of what we usually get for Title I. And most of you think, you know, when you hear from me or if I call you, you think about Title I. So it can be a little confusing, and I know that. And I know that because a few folks have said, oh, so does this impact my Title I? It does not impact your Title I. It is not Title I funding. It is from the Education Stabilization Fund under the CARES Act due to COVID-19. And so I hope I'm not causing confusion because I was the Title I director for some time and then led the ESEA team. I am no longer in that role. I now work for the Commissioner's Office. And so please hear me when I say this has nothing to do with Title I, and it will not impact your upcoming Title I allocation. I know there are a few folks just last week that shared those questions, and so I wanted to take time to clear that up this morning. The last portion of funding that really impacted education was the higher ed funding, and that went out first, and so that has already been dispersed to all of Maine's universities and colleges. So I don't see any questions in the chat box. I'm going to keep moving, but if you have a question, please reach out. There is no silly question, and I think what's happened is that there's been so much information, and although we meet every day, it's impossible for folks in the field to be in every single Department of Education meeting. And so we've transitioned to the weekly meeting to hopefully give you all the information at once and not have the fear of missing anything, but also we're just going to take it a little bit slower and make sure that we go over the history every time we meet, so that if you're a new person to your role or if you're new to this responsibility, we'll make sure that you're caught up right away. So as I said earlier, again, not Title I funds, and the items that you can spend this money on are pretty far and wide. And so, you know, we're talking everything from ESEA, IDEA, adult education, Evento, and then COVID-19. And so you'll notice a little later in the presentation, we're going to share some of those other COVID-19 project ideas. But as a reminder, those are just ideas. Those are not the only things you could spend your money on. I think folks are still brainstorming with their stakeholders. And so we might see some even, you know, more exciting ideas next week. But they're just somewhere for you to get started. So Maine was one of the first states to apply for funding and to receive funding. And then the department took about 2 weeks and approved our application. We are on a reimbursement model. And so with our federal funds, we all use the same portal, which is the GEM system. So the consolidated application, that portal also serves as the ESSERF portal. If you are new to federal funds and you don't have a login, you simply need to email me. We'll also put that in the chat, and we'll make sure that you get a login set up right away. It's taking the GEM administrator just a few hours to get new folks logged on. But if you are currently serving in a federal programs director role or in the business office as the business manager, your login credentials should work. If they don't, please reach out. Heather, I'm having trouble reading the chat box while in presentation mode. So if there are questions that I should answer, I'm just going to pause to make sure we don't miss anyone.
There are a couple questions right now. Did you want to answer those now or wait?
No, I'd like to answer them now. I don't want to be moving so quickly that folks are feeling like, geez, she's onto a whole new topic and forgot about me.
Right.
Thanks, Paul, because I was on mute.
Okay. Did you want us to read them, or do you want to, would that help?
That would help, yeah, so we can keep things neat.
Okay, I'll go ahead. So the first question is from Denise Van Kampen. She's wondering, is there anywhere online that we can see information about gear funding? We had tried to find that last week and I couldn't find it, so.
There was a priority notice that went out in the newsroom, so we can send you that hyperlink in the chat. There's not a gear website, if that's the question, but there is, of course, a priority notice, which gives you an update on where things are with all of the surveys and the devices. The other thing I just want to note, Maine is a pass-through. The Department of Education has worked with the Department of Administration and Finance, basically the state's business office, to make these purchases, to negotiate with vendors, and to get the devices out to districts. We don't have a website that kind of gives you like, this district had X number of devices and they're there, because it's actually something that happens in between the district and the vendor once we make the order. So you might be a district that is still, your tech director is still working with a vendor to complete some of the required paperwork. But that information we have, and we can give that to you if you reach out to Paige Nichols.
Okay, thank you, Chelsea. The next question has to do with the application for ESSER funds. If we have submitted an application and resubmitted an application based on feedback from the DOE, when should we expect a review?
So the ESSERF team has been meeting daily, and so they are reviewed daily. If they are needing to be reopened, you'll get a message through the GEM system. If they are not needing to be reopened, you'll get a grant award notification, as I said. If not, if you haven't already, you will later today. If you could send me a message about what your district name is, I will look into it once we get off this call. The ESSER team meets every early morning, afternoon, so we're actually meeting immediately following this call.
Okay, and the next one has to do with the notifications, so this is perfect segue. Don McLaughlin says, so my application was open to modify a date. I did not receive notification it was reopened, and neither did my super, so I was unaware, and that worries me for the grant notification.
I would agree with you, Don. That worries me a lot. I'm glad you told us that. So we, Don, now I'm recorded and everyone's hearing it, but you've been approved, and so you should have a grant award notification. So we'll look into that. It could be that the GEM administrator just needs to fix some coding on the back end to make sure that those emails are being sent out. But yes, thank you for the tip, and we will check on that when we meet right after this call.
The next one is one that I've seen before, and I know it's been answered, but Cynthia's asking, what is the DUNS number? Is there a place where they can go to get that, or are you just sending it out separately?
So in the frequently asked questions, the document on the CARES Act webpage, we've answered that question, and I'm just going to ask JC to put in the text. You'll have to reach out to Dun & Bradstreet and call the number, and they'll be able to give you the DUNS number. I also know that, you know, we're kind of living this too with you from the state side, right? Most of us, when we came into the world of federal grants, everything had been set up, right? These programs have existed for a very long time, and now we have a new grant program, and some of that information we're needing to get a refresher on. So JC, if you could just add that information in the chat box, it'd be much appreciated. And we'll also put in a link for the FAQ document, because that has recently been updated as well.
Okay, and then let's see, Teresa, is there an estimated turnaround time from when the application is submitted to when we receive approval notification? And I think you just kind of responded.
Yeah, we've been reviewing every day, and so if it didn't get approved, it will be reopened. I think Don, though, just unearthed a little issue we might have with reopening. You may not know that you've been reopened, and so we will look into that as soon as this call wraps up.
And the next message from Keith is noting the same thing, that neither he nor the superintendent received notification.
But the next one from Dawn I just want to share is a big woot. Thank you, Chelsea. So it's good to get appreciation.
Yeah, and we will look into that right away, folks. So this is good for us, right? So you get information from us, and then we get information from you. It's really important. So even when you test things out, you still might have hiccups. So it sounds like we have one, and we'll take care of that today.
I think that wraps up the questions for now, if you want to continue with the presentation.
All right, so the timeline. I'm getting a lot of questions about timeline, and that is such a good question, right? So when is this due, and how long do I have? And so this is just a friendly reminder that it is a rolling basis. And so I know many of you have reached out to the department, either the finance team or the ESSER team or the commissioner's office, and have shared kind of where you are currently in the budget process. And so our answer to you is take the time you need within reason, right? So we know that most districts are not going to submit right now based on what we've been hearing. That's fine. But let's say your budget process goes really, really well and things move more quickly than you had originally anticipated, and you change your timeline. As I said, you know, we've been meeting every day. As things slow down, we'll go to every other day, and if they slow down even further, we might go to, you know, twice a week. But we will make sure that if it was submitted the day before, you get a review within 24 hours. The team has met now well over a dozen times. They are well calibrated, and each of the federal program folks are, you know, they have years of deep knowledge in their program, and so they're able to look at it independently as well. Now, you do need to make sure, though, you are obligating by September 2022. I know most folks, you're going to be spending your money well before then, but even the, you know, the $100 or so that ends up sitting in an account, anything beyond that you will lose. And so that's a really important date to put in our calendars. The other question that has come up in some of the application reviews and in conversations was, well, what do you really mean by encumbered on or after March 13th? And what we mean by that is, when did you make that binding a commitment, right? So when we review the application, the ESSER team is going to be looking for, if you're talking in the past tense, we're going to be looking to be sure that you're confirming that the purchase that was made in the past was made on or after March 13th. And so that's going to be super helpful for Tyler and Paula, right, and Ida, because as the finance team starts to see the reimbursement requests rolling in, they are going to need to check to be sure that that March 13th date has been honored. If it's not, we won't be able to pay the invoice. The other important thing to note here is that I know that many folks had to purchase things on about March 14th or March 15th. There's no need to call me or to email and ask, is that okay? It absolutely is okay, right? Like, that's after March 13th. But if your paperwork doesn't show that date, we won't be able to give you reimbursement. So those dates are super important on the documentation. The first invoice that anyone sends in should include everything that was purchased in the past. So we want to kind of clean up the books through ESSER in that first invoice. And the finance team will be the folks that are reviewing it. So that's a little different, right? So usually those of you that have worked with me in the past, there's a person on my team that would be doing the, you know, the finance piece. Because ESSER funds doesn't live with a specific federal program, and Tyler and I are leading it, Tyler's team will be the ones that take care of the finance piece. The other important thing to note is that Tyler sends out the handbook with all of the codes that you'll need. That handbook is going to be updated on an ongoing basis, and if there are updates made, Tyler will send it out to the listserv. But he'll also be looking to make sure that the coding is accurate in those invoices. Tyler, anything you need to add?
Well, so I do want to note, so as they submit the applications, they at least, if they have, so if they don't submit an invoice until next fiscal year, I do need at least at a minimum the invoice, the first request to only extend through June 30th so that we're not crossing fiscal years. It just makes reviewing the invoice a lot harder, and then the backup documentation much harder when they overlap fiscal years.
So for those that are
Can
new
you
to this
repeat that,
conversation,
Tyler?
So when the first invoice is submitted, and if you at that point in time have expenditures that both occur in fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21, submit the first invoice just for any expenses that you had in fiscal year 20, and then you can submit the rest after that on as a second invoice.
And Tara Thompson is asking for confirmation too. She says in the chat, did you just say that the first invoice has to have all expenses to date? I thought you had previously said that we had to submit March 13 to 31 and then April 1 to 30 by month only.
So I had in an earlier presentation said that I would like them monthly, and we may do that moving forward, but especially with the first fiscal year 20, as to not hold up people getting their funds back, I'll switch that to submitting the whole amount that you've spent in fiscal year 20, and then I'll clarify that with the business managers, because I had let them know that I'd like to have them monthly. But we can, I'm flexible, so.
But I think too, Tyler, you know, the monthly expectation is something we have across the floor in federal programs, right? We want to keep things really up to date and be able to look at them each month. But we're about to end a fiscal year with funding that will span several. And so really with this, we're not saying something different. What we're saying is we need to clean this up, get it up to date, and then follow the expectations that we have for all federal programming across the floor. So Tara, great question. And I'm glad you asked it because we need to be super clear on our expectations. And so the expectation would be we'd clean it up and then we would continue on a monthly basis moving forward.
Also,
a couple
other questions, Chelsea. Sherry Proctor just wanted to confirm, she thought that earlier the state stated that funds needed to be obligated by September 30 of 2021, and now you had just said 2022, so she just wants to make sure she understands the correct date.
So last week and 2 weeks ago, the U.S. Department of Education came out with their frequently asked questions. And with all of this, we only can share with you what we've received in writing. And so we first received in writing 2021, and then they put out their SAQ document that did the extension of 2022. We'll put their SAQ document in the chat so that you can see it as well. There's a lovely little visual with blue arrows that tell you exactly what each of those benchmarks are, but that document does state 2022. The grant award notification.
They just changed it.
And the grant award notification also, we had an internal conversation, I think it was late last week, about that very same thing. And I know the answer to your question because we all went back together to discuss it. Barb, Shelley, and I had the same like, what is going on? But their latest document is what we must follow.
And the only other one is Chandra is wondering about her application that was submitted on 5/28 and she hasn't heard yet. I'm going to recommend that she send you a separate email, Chelsea.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
So we have had one application of the 20 that have been submitted statewide that did need to be opened because there were missing items on the application. And so that's why we're just going over this one more time. If you have an item in the budget and you've put in any amount of money, there needs to be a description. Now, I'm not asking for, a 3-paragraph description. In some cases, a few sentences would be appropriate, but we need something. And if we don't have anything, it's an immediate reopen. The other thing to remember, when this application was created, Commissioner Macon was clear that she wanted to be able to get this money out to districts quickly, and she wanted it to be user-friendly. And so this application doesn't have several pages that are separate. So when we reopen it, we're reopening the entire thing. That doesn't mean we are asking you to make any additional changes beyond the ones that were in our message that went through the system. Now, I say that a little laughingly because obviously we've just found out that the system may not be sending messages to folks. So you wouldn't know that yet. But for those that have been reopened, when we figure out what the glitch is after this call, we will resend all of those that have been reopened so that you'll have them in your inbox.
We have one other question from, I think is it Lori Glidden? I'm going to unmute her so she can ask her question. Go ahead.
Hey, sorry, I just didn't know how to write all this in chat. So we submitted our application, got back information that says that we, 2 of our categories would affect our subsidy. One is tutoring that we have to do for students to get them back where they need to be, and the other one is transportation. So, I mean, these are important things we need to do, but obviously we don't want to affect our subsidy, and not sure if we're putting them in wrong, can put them in a different place, or how that works.
Tyler, you are the EPS expert here, so I am deferring to you.
Okay.
But I do want to say before we go into the answer, when we send that message, it is simply a, here's some information, do with it what you will. It is not us expecting that you will take any further action. That's up to you.
Yeah, I understand that, but obviously we don't want it affecting our subsidy for the next year. So we're just, I'm just kind of wondering if there's something I should be doing differently, or, it's obviously stuff that I'm sure a lot of people are having to do to catch students up. And then transportation is because we're going to have to probably do several bus runs. And so it's going to be an increase in transportation costs.
Well, and so Lori, that was a really important piece at the end where you're saying that would be an increase in your transportation costs. So one thing we don't want to do is have you move over expenditures that would normally happen through your general fund into these fundings, because then that would lower, or would potentially lower your future transportation
So we're not moving
allocation.
any,
Right.
we're not moving, we're
Yeah.
adding.
So if you're adding costs to one of those categories, then I would say that's unlikely to affect your future EPS allocation. So the in sending it back is just to make sure that you understand if you're moving a cost, then that would lower future allocation. But if you have new costs, then that's not gonna affect your future EPS allocation.
Okay, perfect. That makes sense.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Any others, Paula? Or are we good to go?
Yep, we do have.
You're muted, Paula.
You're muted, Paula. But Don is saying, can I be clear that we cannot reimburse a private school directly that purchases medical equipment or PPE, that those purchases need to be made directly by their SAU?
Don, you are absolutely right. The SAU must always remain the fiscal agent. We could never provide reimbursement, cut a check to a private school.
And then there's one other question from Donna. I believe do we have to process our application for the full amount, or can we apply for costs through end of June while we consider other options for use come next year? So, and I believe you have answered that in that you do have to submit for the whole amount of funding, and then you can make changes in the future if your priorities change.
Which is why the application is on a rolling basis, right? So we know that some folks just don't know right now and they want to wait, and then others, they have very clear ideas what they purchased in the past and would like reimbursement for right away. But you do need a complete application. The system will expect that your entire allocation needs to be included in the budget before they'll allow you to submit. So the successful applications that have been submitted so far, they include a needs assessment process that mentions how the projects included below in your budget were determined. It also includes concrete timelines, right? So we have to look to be sure that the timeline you believe you're working with truly aligns with what's in the descriptions, and then what will come through the reimbursement portal to the finance team. Align budgets and project descriptions. I mentioned this a little earlier, but we had an application that had budgets, but no description at all. And so those will be reopened immediately. And then budgets that meet federal programming requirements. So we've seen a few applications that the $500 rule around equipment versus supplies is not being followed, so they were reopened. And we also want to be sure to remind folks that we'll have another, we'll probably do this next week, but another conversation around when you spend money in equipment with federal program funds, you do have expectations you must follow. And so we'll go over that in about a week so that we can remind folks of any of the tracking and inventory that's required. But if you spend federal funds on equipment, there are some additional rules to follow. So in some cases, you may notice that we've read your application and we didn't reopen it right away, but you received a call from me. And I started out reminding everyone, I'm not the Title I director, I'm not the ESE director anymore. I'm now working in the Commissioner's office. I'm the Director of Policy and Government Affairs. So if I call you, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with ESE federal programs. I had a few folks that answered and sounded very nervous. I'm just calling to say, hey, I'm about to reopen it, and I want to talk about why I might reopen it so that we can get it resubmitted very quickly. So a few of those calls, like I said, have already happened. There's, I think, probably one more call I'm going to make this afternoon. The other point of our approach right now is that we want to be able to provide meaningful technical assistance. And sometimes just opening something with a sentence to say, you need to fix this, it's not right, isn't helpful, right? So that's why we're making calls to talk through things. And it might also be that we haven't asked for a lot of detail, but after talking to you, it makes more sense and we're able to easily approve the application. So don't be alarmed if you get a call from me in the near future. We just want to make sure we get this right together. Paula, I see the number in the chat box is growing. Are there any questions that we should take before we move on?
Yes, so Mitchell is asking, did I hear correctly that each item needs to have an explanation with it? Also, do the costs of items need to be exact?
So you did hear correctly, Mitch. Every budget item needs to have a description. So if you place something in adult ed or COVID-19, one of those buckets, and you put money there, there needs to be a couple sentences to say what it is that you're purchasing. Now, the reason for that is that when we approve the invoice, we need to make sure that the invoice aligns with whatever it was that was approved in the application.
And then Kathy is saying, and Tyler, this is probably more for you. What project line would you put the set aside funds while waiting to see if guidance becomes law or directive regarding private schools?
So I'm kind of presuming that for the most part, and I think you'll have to make a bit of a guess, but in a sense, you'll have to look at what types of services do you generally provide as part of your set aside. And then you would put them into that budget category. So if you generally provide some instructional support, then you would put them into the instruction. So you'll have to kind of, I mean, I suppose, foresee a little bit to what you might provide, and then use that to help guide you.
So I think the question is talking about last week we shared the U.S. Department of Education's response to CCSSO, in which the U.S. Secretary of Education said you should hold the full amount that would be given as an equitable share to private schools if you followed the guidance that's been put out by the department. And I've noticed, and our team has noticed, that in some applications, what they've done is they've completed the consultation and the consultation form, which is on the CARES Act webpage. They've completed that, but during the consultation, the private school shared what they would love to have based on the guidance amount that's been agreed on between the two, SAU and the private school, and what the Title I clear reading of the law from Section 117 would provide. And so in that description, the district actually put the two options. And they said, at this time, we're going in this direction and this is what will be put in the budget. But if things change, they can always reopen and update the budget.
I think that's it for now.
Thank you. Here's an example of the needs assessment section from an application that was successful. And so in this example, you have the RSU leadership team meeting, talking about how they prioritize needs, how they reached out to families throughout the process. And the detail is incredible. I can tell you, I think this is a really great example, but not every approved application to date has had this much information included. But to have this much information, it will be really helpful when communicating with the community and the board about what was decided and how they went about their work. Now here's another example of that first question being answered successfully. So the district is talking about their needs assessment process in terms of the surveys and the outreach they did with their community members, as well as some consultation with health officials. And this one is different, and it looks different and their application looks very different, right? So when we read the needs assessment, what we're looking for is to have a clear understanding of how the prioritization occurred, and then to make sure that whatever is in the needs assessment discussed would be included in the following budget. Here's another district, also successful in their application. And I think she might have outed herself earlier in this meeting where I told her that her grant award notification is coming. But again, it's a different community, so it reads differently, but it is clear they've done the needs assessment. They've honored the needs throughout all of the communities in their union, and they have a clear path for moving forward. Paula, I see that the chat box is lighting up again. Is there anything we should stop and pause for?
No, that was just Dawn saying yes and LOL. So.
Oh, okay. So the timeline. The timeline does not require a lengthy narrative, but the timeline should be clear. Within which school year are you intending to spend the funding? And of course, you have the entire duration of the grant period, but if you are intending to spend it in this next school year, please state that. Although we have not received the template for Maine's SEA required initial report, which is due in just a few weeks, we do know that they are very interested, based on calls with the U.S. Department of Education, in understanding how quickly states and their districts are spending the education stabilization funding under ESSER. So your answer here is going to allow us to answer questions that the U.S. Department of Education will require us to give them just a few weeks. So if you didn't put anything in this section, which I think there might have been one district that put 2 words, we will need to reopen it because we need to know the time frame you're hoping to work in. And again, the caveat here is, I know things change. The team knows that, and we will absolutely reopen and let you make revisions if they change in a week or in a month or in 3 months. So COVID-19 projects. COVID-19, there are several options under the COVID-19 portion of the application, and by far, this has been the most popular section of the application to allocate your funding to, which makes a lot of sense, right? So under the COVID-19 related cost buckets, you have a lot more flexibility. You're not looking at all of the federal program requirements that are within the other options. And so we're seeing this in a lot, but we're also reading a lot about guidance and counseling services for students, social and emotional support for students, and things connected to that. Now excuse my screen, we also are looking to see the timeline. So as I said earlier, if you're speaking in the past tense about something that has already been purchased, we do need to know when you did that so that we can approve it. What we wouldn't want to do was to approve something, make an assumption, and then finance gets the invoice and they're not able to process it. So that is why we're asking for that additional information. Now I notice I'm looking at Tyler, Paula, and Ida, but that means you can't read my entire screen. So I'm gonna scoot them down. So this next one, school administration. There have been a lot of questions around administration, and can I have someone be in the administration bucket, and what would that look like? And the only answer we have to give you is that it's just simply, you must follow the reasonable and necessary requirements. And so reasonable and necessary is going to look different in nearly every context. And that is why it is so important that for us on the Maine DOE side, one person, me or anybody else, doesn't have the authority to say, oh, I think that's reasonable and necessary. Rather, our entire ESSER team meets to talk about what it looks like to be reasonable and necessary in the context of that SAU. This example, though, is a new position where they are hiring a social worker for 1 year. Of course, you don't see all the details because you can't read their whole application because that would out the district. But this is an example that we're seeing in a few of the applications, and we suspect we'll probably see a bit more later. To Mitch's question earlier, do I need to know the exact amount for each line in the budget? So, like with any other federal program, we know that you might not have down to the pennies or even down to the $10 amount how much supplies are going to cost, for a given project. So we expect you're going to round and do your best estimates. And if things change drastically throughout the process, you'll just email us and we'll reopen it and you can make the update. The reimbursement system, for those of you that are new to this, it will be through GEM. For those of you that this is old hat, you'll just notice that it's the ESSER bar before you submit any reimbursement requests. We really want to be clear though, again, I know, like I said this so many times, you've heard it, stop, but this is not Title I funding, so please do not request Title I funding reimbursement. We've had confusion in the past with different grants and it gets messy quickly. So if you don't see ESSER at the top, do not submit the reimbursement request for this funding. And then our resources. We are continuing to update the COVID-19 CARES Act webpage. That webpage will give you the new FAQs, as well as information around some CARES Act waivers that will impact other federal programs in the coming fiscal year and policy guidance. So maybe we didn't share an example today of something you want to do, but you're wondering, is it allowable? Policy guidance should serve as a really good tool for you, but also always feel free to email and reach out to us or call us. So I am going to stop sharing my screen and open it up for questions and hand it back to Tyler, because I believe he also had an update today.
So if you have questions, put them into the chat box. And so I shared this with the business managers last Thursday, but I do just want to note it here as well. As you submit your first invoice, like any other federal funds, it will ask for backup. So if you could just submit your general ledger, you don't need to submit any additional backup, but just a rundown of what those expenditures are for that period. And then if I need any more detail on any item within that, then I'll request that individually. But I'm not going to ask for. I know it sometimes you will submit all the invoices for an individual for all the individual expenses. I'm not having to do that, but you will need to submit the general ledger that shows the expenses. So Chelsea, they're asking if your PowerPoint will be available on the website.
Yeah, so Tyler, I saved it in our ESSERF CARES Act folder, so I can email that link to you and we can put it up on your team's page.
Yep. Okay. And I do have some stuff to put up there as well, but.
Okay. And then I just received 2 messages from folks that said we haven't heard anything. Can you check for me? Both of which have been approved. And so I know that there's a glitch with the grant award notifications, without a doubt. So we will deal with that and get them out to you later today.
So if we don't have any other questions, I think we can wrap up this meeting. So for business managers that are on this call, you should. Thank you, Chelsea. For business managers on this call, I haven't sent out the notice yet, but you will receive an email for our meeting tomorrow, and that'll be for the next 7 or so meetings, so that I'm not sending them out weekly last minute. So do expect that. So if you don't see that within the next half an hour or so, first check your junk mail. I do know it has gone into junk mail for a couple of people. But otherwise, if you don't see it in there, let me know and I can send you an individual message with it.
And Tyler, just to verify, this meeting was changed from Tuesdays to Wednesdays, right?
Correct. Yep.
So everybody gets that right on their calendars?
Yep. So
Okay.
so you should delete because I don't think the way I sent it out, it didn't delete the meeting from Tuesday for this meeting, but you can delete it for on Tuesday and then keep the one for Wednesday moving forward. And I think you should have 6 more meetings already in your calendar for that.
And Chelsea just posted how to get your DUNS number through Dun and Bradstreet if you don't have that yet on the chat window.
Oh, okay. And so Dan is asking, I assume that any personnel charged to the program would require employer match for any retirement contribution. So that is correct. So this is like any federal program. So that higher amount, I don't know exactly what it is for Maine PERS. This would work the same way. And do you think trying to cover unfunded costs for food service payroll during the pandemic will be allowable? I mean, so Dan, I think we have answered that, you know, to a point in the past that it does appear that the last category within the allowable uses that would cover, you know, food service costs. So it does, you know, so from our previous readings of the categories, that would be approvable. And so Adam, the slides will get up on Teams, and I will try to have everything updated before tomorrow. I have a couple of other things that need to go up there, so we will get them up. So, and I do have a note that Wednesdays at 10 a.m. is difficult. Those are the ESEA grants, as there's a 10:30 meeting each week. And yeah, and this is, I mean, the problem that we're running into, where we are hosting so many meetings that they are kind of running into each other. So, oh, and I do want to note, as people have had difficulty trying to get into the Teams website, these meetings will start. Tyler Rollins, who's on the school finance team, is working to get them posted to the department's YouTube page, and they should be available there. I do know he was having a small hiccup occur, but they will start showing up there, so then you don't have to log into a site to get to the videos.
Jennifer Nickerson just noted that the ESEA meetings are at 11, so hopefully that's okay.
Yep. And so to clarify, Kathy's asking, the ESSER CARES meetings are now only on Wednesday, and yes, Kathy, that is correct. They are only on Wednesday now. We're not doing them daily anymore. So I'm going to stop the recording.